Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this now snowy Saturday morning here at the Art Clinic Online. It's nice to be doing virtual on days like today. We have a real treat with us this to start off our new year with Don Whitmore. But introducing Don Whitmore is a past ACO presenter, and I guess we call him ACO alumni. With Julia Bloom, who is an incredible artist in her own right. And I encourage you after this talk today, go back into the ACO archives and take a look at her video. She does these incredible text-based with an old-fashioned typewriter imagery. And also, aside from being an incredible artist, she's an incredible gallery space director of the Freight Gallery in DC, which is a really unique and wonderful space, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about today with Don's talk. But without further ado, I will introduce Julia Bloom, who will pass the torch to our artist today.
Thanks, Jordan. Can you hear me okay? Great. And thank everyone for coming today. Thank you. It is my honor to introduce Don Whitmore, who I first met in 2022 when she reached out to me about doing an installation at Freight Gallery. Dawn is a Washington, D.C. interdisciplinary artist. She has a BFA from the Corcoran. Her work has been shown in numerous venues, among them the Mesa Museum of Contemporary Art in Arizona, Hemphill Fine Arts, Herald Square in D.C., Area 405 in Baltimore, Spring Valley in New York, and Freight Gallery, just to name a few. Her work was also featured during DC Photo Week and the Dumbo Arts Festival in New York City. Her work has been published in The Guardian, the Virginia Quarterly Review, Of Note, the Iowa Review, and the Washington Post. She has received several grants from the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. She is involved in numerous interesting projects and collaborations. And on top of all this, she works full-time at National Geographic as a photo editor. And her most recent project, she just had a baby. Dawn's art focuses on mythology, gender, and identity. She works in painting, drawing, photography, video, and installation. And her work is very process-oriented as she explores her inner emotional landscape. She has created her own iconography, ladders, chairs, and snakes, just to name a few, which often relates to this personal landscape. And regarding her show at Freight Gallery, she threw herself into this site-specific project, which she called Something of Three. And it combined sculpture, video, sound, and smell. And a collaborator created the soundtrack. Dawn worked on the video until the absolute last minute. She fretted that she was putting herself out there for the whole world to see, which kind of made me smile because the video was so symbolic and abstract. But that's how personal her work is, and that's how deeply invested she is in her art. Something of Three was a huge success and was featured in the Hyperallergic article about Freight Gallery. Dawn is intellectually curious, and her art is intuitive, intensely personal, smart, thoughtful, and genuine. She has a directness that is disarming, an almost childlike quality in its sincerity, and that manifests in her work. And with no further ado, Don Whitmore.
Whoa, Julia, thank you so much for that phenomenal intro. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you so much, Jordan and Mariana, for having me here this morning. And everyone who showed up on a Saturday morning, this is an awesome group. I'm really excited to talk about my practice and what I'm doing or what I think I'm doing, or I don't know, this is part of my art today. It feels like here comes the vulnerability and the self that Julia spoke of. So I will open up my presentation now. Okay, so I'm Dawn. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I have been making work forever, since I was really tiny. I think I got my first finger paint set when I was about 3, and I've just been going since. My practice, as Julia said, it incorporates a lot of photo, video, painting, performance, sound, drawing. Drawing is kind of the essence behind the scenes of everything. There's a lot of symbols that I tend to go to, the ladders, the snakes and chairs. And so for this talk, I think what I'm going to do is kind of just start chronologically with the origins of it all, which really start with photography. Photography was my main focus growing up, and a lot of that is because I was incredibly shy, and the camera was a way for me to be in the world, kind of with a barrier between me, though. So we'll start with, this is my first self-portrait, and to those of you who know my work, I'm in a lot of my work. I'm often performing for video or photos that always incorporate myself. And so, as I mentioned, I was a super shy person, and I would never take pictures of other people. I would do plants and animals, but there was this deep kind of curiosity of being very much stuck in myself, kind of like in my own world. And I read a lot. And I was obsessed with choose your own adventure novels, which I also think kind of braid into my work now. And so I really fell in love with the darkroom and the magic of black and white photography. And I had this amazing teacher in high school, and she just encouraged me like crazy. So what I would do is I'd set up all these scenes in my room, and I had a little film Nikon, and I'd kind of get everything going and then jump in front of it and hope that the frame was okay. And here's 15-year-old artist me without a clue of like that I would be able to make it this far and still have this amazing practice that has become my entire life, really. So I ended up going to the Corcoran for photography. I graduated from there in 2005. And at that time, I constantly had a camera on me. As I said, that was my entry into the world. I could be in the world, but also really protected with something in front of me, kind of as a buffer. And I was interested in exploring these scenes around me that looked like there was something a little bit more beneath the surface than what reality was kind of showing me in the moment. The person to the right is my little sister, and then the woman to the left is one of my best friends. And I continuously photographed, and these are 2 images out of about 200 from my thesis that I printed on these little tiny cards. And I had them all sorted out on a desk so participants could come sort through these photos, and they could line them up on a shelf to create their own narrative. So from a very, very early time in my practice, I was interested in like, what are the narratives behind what reality is showing us right now? And here are 2 additional images. The left is from college, and the right was from, I lived in France for a couple of years, and one of my adventures there. I had done some work with painting in college. In fact, I remember a professor of mine was like, if you want to paint, you could really run at it right now. But painting has always felt incredibly vulnerable to me. Painting is like, that's me. And it took me a long time to feel comfortable to be me out in the world, because photo, it's like, oh, it's directed away from me. It felt much safer. And so I continue with photography. I moved to France for 2 years right after graduation from Corcoran, and then I came back. And around that time, my grandmother got very sick with cancer, and my grandmother and I had been very close. And this was probably one of the first more serious photo essays that I did. Shortly before her passing, my mom and my uncle threw her a party, a celebration of life. And my uncle is a neon artist and also collects old vintage signs. So we had this really amazing barbecue in his backyard. And this is one of the images from it. And so I was beginning to pull meanness of my life kind of into my work, and not just photographing outward. there was a lot more emotion, I felt like, to this. So that's my grandmother to the left and her sister, my aunt, to the right. And I feel like something here, I started to get more brave with putting myself out there. Like, this was my family, and starting to think a lot more about photography and how I could use that beyond just image. So I began to make these sculptural forms on photos that I had taken. So the base photos of these two images, this is from a project called Memories of a Decade Past. And so they were images that I had created and printed and then just kind of put away and forgot about them. And I don't know if I was moving or for whatever reason, I mean, I think I might have been moving into my studio at Arlington Art Center, that I found them and I was like, well, what am I going to do with these? The photos aren't super strong, but they had sentimental value to me. So I began to experiment with building layers. And this is really kind of when my deep interest in fruit in my work came into play. And so I'd build these collages and then photograph them from above. And going back to fruit, I love fruit for many reasons. One, I love color. I love smell. And I love the symbolism of fruit. You know, fruit has been an offering to the deities, to the gods, to royalty, to everyone for a very, very long time. You know, we give fruit baskets at the holidays. There's something very special about giving fruit. And I think it's a really great metaphor for life. You know, here's your fruit. You have to eat it now. You must enjoy it. You must juice it and like just really relish in the sweetness of it before it rots. And so I did a whole series of these photos with a combination of artificial plants and real fruit. And then I photographed them. And this was the work that was shown at Hemphill in the Carroll Square Gallery. So continuing with the photo assemblages, I was now starting to think about, like, what if we are subtracting images, elements of images from photos without Photoshop, with the hand, like we actually like cut out pieces. And this was about the time when I was reading a lot of articles about women and guns. For some reason that year, the most famous or the most popular gun for sale for women was a Hello Kitty gun. And so I started looking at all these images of women and guns, and it became kind of this obsession, and it became an exhibit at Arlington Art Center, now MoCA. And this was one of the first pieces of it. So this is many layers of photos. These were actually nude women. Some of them had guns, and I would just cut them out. And they were all in these like very strange environments. And I was trying to think about, like, well, what about the environment when we cut out this kind of this sexualized form from it? What is left here? And then the departure for the full-on gun love project kicked off. And so I did a series of portraits where I invited women who had never held firearms before to come into my studio. And I had made these fake guns, and you can see there's a gold one in this image. And I asked them to hold them however it felt appropriate. And this was so fascinating. There was, the ages were from about, I think, 40 to 9 years old, or 9 to 40. And one of the first things every single person did was like the really sexy Charlie's Angels pose. And so, you know, I was just really thinking a lot about like sex and guns and like how weird this is. And at the same time, I was also an assistant for an incredible psychoanalyst. So we were talking a lot about like, you know, like, what does this mean? This kind of over-sexualized imagery. So this is one of those portraits. There's I think a series of about 8 of them. And then accompanying that project are small square images. They're about 9 by 9 that include images. These are real guns that I'd found on people's social media sites, and I pulled them. And then I started going back to the same thing about layering. So I'd put in these like gems, and you can see these little sparkly gems that I'd sprinkled all over after I put the wallpaper background in. Starting to think about layers. Layers have always been important to me. These kind of, my painting teacher that I mentioned before, she had told me that my work always has lots of veils, and it's kind of this constant pulling back of the veils. And I now can see it, particularly with where I'm at with painting clearly, but this is what I was trying to get through and understand with the photography. So the same with my fine art studio practice is I'm also a documentary photographer. And I did a lot of work in subcultures, and I'm very interested in communities that have lifestyles that are very different than mine. And I was super fortunate to meet this incredible group of women bodybuilders, and they let me hang out with them hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to work on a project that shows like what it's like to be a woman bodybuilder. So they were all preparing for a really large show that was going to happen in, I believe it was Roanoke, no, Virginia Beach. And they trained for a year and a half, and I got to hang out through every moment of it. And it was really interesting because whenever I start projects like this, I think about like, well, like how could this be me? Because this is so different. This is a world I would never partake in or never do. But what I always learn is that people have these kind of obsessions and these passions that I might not resonate with, but it's kind of the identical element to me in my art practice. It's this almost like this compulsion where I have to make and I have to think and I have to pull back the layers of all the veils of reality to try to understand it. One, for curiosity, and two, because I think there's a lot of space there for play. And you'll see later in the work, I really love play. So I hung out with these awesome women for a couple of years. I went to all their training sessions, often at like 5 o'clock in the morning. They all had full-time jobs, but they were completely dedicated to this life of building muscle and feeling strong and also feeling sexy. And so this is just one of the images from the show that happened, and it's pretty cool because one of the women actually won kind of best of the whole thing of her category. So then back to the studio practice, things started to shift. And I guess in many ways, this is when I started to get really real with myself. I started to have a lot of dreams about snakes. And in the dreams, I was never afraid. They were always just kind of hanging out with me. But in real life, I was pretty phobic. And so I started to think about like, well, what is this fear? And like, what is the courage in the dream, but the fear in real life? And I began to do a lot of research into the mythology and history and spirituality behind snakes. And it was so cool because in many countries around the world, snakes are kind of seen as blessings. They're symbols of infinity and fertility and everlasting life. And, you know, in a lot of our culture, it's seen as like sin, bad, like horrible. And I was focusing on like, how can I start to work through this? Like, what might it be? And I took a bunch of self-portraits, and then I imposed with Photoshop these wallpapers. So it's kind of domestic scene. And then I hand embroidered these snakes around me into the photograph after it was printed and mounted on canvas. And this process took a very long time. I would say each snake was about 8 hours of hand sewing. And I used it as like meditation to think about fear. Like when we feel fear, like where is it in our body? Like how does it move through us and how does it hold us back? And then how also can we use that as a force to like kind of propel us forward instead of something to hinder us and hold us back? So this was the first time I did self-portraits that actually showed people, because I've really done self-portraits my whole life, but I'd never show anyone any of them because it felt too vulnerable. But here we go. You know, I think it just felt like time to start putting bits of myself out into the world in a different way. So here's another snake. And then this one's my favorite. That's my beloved dog, Ben, who used to come to the studio with me every day, my constant companion. And so thinking this is step one, and like Dawn in front of the camera as opposed to behind it. And then I started to focus more on drawing and showing those too, because these had always been kind of like private things to me. I've drawn my whole life. I drew a ton as a teenager, and I decided to be like, well, what if I start like drawing from teenage Dawn self? Like what would come through if I let myself draw like that? And I don't try to draw all serious like I, did in art school and everything, but just let go. And all of these like fun images started to come out, and of course, some mystical stuff. You'll see there's the labyrinth on the right, which I love labyrinth so much. And this is when the ladders begin to surface in my work. And a lot of that comes from the research that I did while focusing on snakes. And I really fell in love with the game Snakes and Ladders. And not a lot of people know, but that originated in India. I forget which century. I want to say the 6th century. And it was used to teach vice and virtue to children. And then when England began to, do their thing in India, they wanted to bring the game back, and they marketed it as Chutes and Ladders because it was not really appropriate or not likable to have it as snakes. So I began to think about a lot of movement, and you'll see the piece on the left, "The Moon is Softly Beaming," is a bunch of sheet music. Music became a really big part of my life. I actually feel like there's a veil of music kind of constantly in the world, and it's a matter of like tuning into it to bring it forward. And more drawing. The chairs are coming up. The chairs I've been obsessed with since college. I have a large collection of wooden chairs. I really love wooden chairs. And so this takes us to one of my first big performances, called The Initiation. And I wrote this really big story that is broken up into 4 parts that each of them have a musical component. So this performance debuted on November 17th. I believe it was 2017. I can't remember right now. I think so. And I got this great grant, and I hired 4 choral singers and a composer. And we had this live piece at Georgetown Waterfront Park. On the labyrinth, you can see the structure is made of 33 wooden hand-built ladders that I made in Tennessee. And I made 33 because that's how old I was at the time. And they all come together to form this kind of hut in the center of the labyrinth. And choral singers were positioned outside of each wall, essentially. And they had glockenspiel keys, and they sung this piece that was kind of this like pulling out, this initiation that was happening, that kicked off right at official sunset on a new moon auspicious day. And so the idea was you're kind of like drawn into this space, and participants could go stand inside of the structure. There's a doorway, and feel the sound coming at them. And I'm very interested in how sound can create shapes. So you had the 4 different sides coming together to kind of meet in the middle to resonate with the participant. And I was going to share a short clip, but I found that it's hard to get audio from videos to play really well over Zoom. So I cut it out, but if you want to see it, it's on my website, and you can go there and check it out. The full piece is on there, as well as like a short demo. Oh, here's the piece. But we're just gonna skip that because I think it's funky. Back to the studio, thinking about me, thinking about like the different realms of possibility with play and with self. Again, pulling some inspiration from my childhood. When I was a kid, I always thought there was another Dawn somewhere else in the world. I always thought exactly straight through the earth to where I was, who was trying to do the same movements at me. So I would do like these funny dance movements and be like, oh, I wonder if she could do that one. And so I brought that forward to play with, like in the studio, like, oh, could there be 2 me's? And like, how would they interact? So I was on residency at VCCA, and I started to have a lot of fun with doing double me's. And I began making these videos where I interact with myself. And I think in many ways, this plays off of a lot of parts of psychology. There's often many parts inside of ourselves. There's the parts we present to the world. There's the parts we are honest with about ourselves, with other people, with ourselves. And very curious, like, how do you get close? How can you merge? How can you become whole with all these different elements that make us who we are? So here I am in the studio painting what will become ladders with myself. This is a short video. We can watch it, let it finish. It's about a minute long. And while I mentioned that I am feeling more comfortable putting myself out in the world, I will say that I only do these things when it's me in my studio by myself. I do all of the filming, I do all of the editing. I'm very controlled when I'm creating these videos. Oh, I forgot there's sound. I'm not sure that will come through. So then we launched forward, and I'm like, let's just have a lot of fun now, and let's play with all the layers, and let's just throw it all out there, because now I'm putting myself out there, I'm putting my voice out there. I'm going to try to understand and share what's going on in my inner world. And I've always loved the game Candyland so much. I just think it's the coolest game for children. As a child, I played tons and tons and tons of it with my sisters and my grandma. And so I began to pull in this more narrative idea of the journey, and this kind of like individual migration through the world. Like how is it we go from square to square, from piece to piece of our life, on this trail that's often kind of, snaky serpentine, and come to where we are, and how strange is it along the way? And what if it's not strange, scary, but kind of like strange, bubblegummy and fun? So I began really getting into drawing and painting again, which I mentioned before is like pure vulnerability for me, which I really, really love now. And these were some of the earlier drawings I did. You'll see the chairs, the ladders. There starts to be a lot of use of the number 8 or the infinity symbol, and these kind of piles of little teeny flowers that pop up and make trails throughout my work. Lots of movement, but kind of, I don't know, for me, it's a lot of play. I think within play, you can begin to discuss more serious issues, um, without feeling scolded or lectured to. So these symbols hopefully open up some of the ideas that I'm having, which will eventually turn into obviously still the self and this inner world, but how that works in tandem with the outer world right now, and kind of like what our current ecological and in outside environment looks like. So here's a couple drawings. Uh, and then I started to jump back into painting, which I hadn't done since I was a teeny child. It'd been a very long time, and I really fell back in love with painting again. So this is one of the, I think I made this painting the second year that I'd returned to painting. It's largish. It's like 68 inches on the long side, I think by 32, something like that. This piece is called Silence in the Spring. And you'll see it's like layers upon layers upon layers of both abstract and then some kind of more realist, cartoony pieces that come up in here. I'm really thinking a lot about how the world that we inhabit inside of us reflects on how we move through the world externally, and thinking a lot about climate change. And at the same time, it feels like things are kind of off kilter within culture and society too. So what does that look like to me? And this is it. I try to use a lot of bright colors, so it's not totally depressing. But there's a lot of uncertainty in here. I think there's a lot of familiarity. There's a little rabbit, there's a fun house, but then in my work often there's axes, and that is tied to deforestation. I love trees very, very, very deeply, and I feel like we have just caused a mess on our hands with how we have treated trees and life and nature. So there's always usually a little hidden axe somewhere in there, that refers to that kind of man-made change that we've done to the earth. So these are painting, another painting. There's often always birds, and the towers. I love towers. This is a very large piece. It's 86 inches on the long side. And it's called Looking Back to Move Forward. And if you notice in the kind of center, somewhat to the right bottom, there's a small tent, and it's the numbers are backwards. So the idea is you use a small handheld mirror, and when you look in the mirror over your shoulder, you see that says 207. And that correlates to a dream that I had, in which right before the dream ended, I looked at a digital clock and it said 207. And I thought that was kind of cool. So I incorporated it into the painting. And then another one. Oh, that's Eric. And then another little guy. And now, where are we now? Now, my apologies. Please come. So then I moved into video installation, making videos, projections, sound, and creating spaces, trying to create the most immersive space I can using all of these disciplines. And I had what is probably my favorite show in any space ever as an artist at Freight Gallery. That elevator is absolutely magical, if an elevator can be magical. It was the funnest show I've ever had to make. Basically, I did a video that pulled from my entire archive of video for like 10 years, everything, and I spliced it all together, and I made this kind of looping narrative of journeying through, like passing through internal world, external. And it's not super easy to talk about the imagery because it is a collage of so much lived experience from me that I worked with a musician to score. And this is one of my favorite videos, favorite installations by far I've ever done. You can check out the video. It's on my website. The video begins with this idea of like a single moment, a single chime that inspires something. And that was represented by an arrow that an archer shot through a dangling orange. And so inside of the elevator, I had real oranges and the arrow that was shot through the orange. And I'd also used some essential oil of orange blossom. So there was this really effervescent kind of like, ooh, nice, really comforting orangeness to it. And so the projector is tucked on this antique writing desk chair. It's kind of like a student desk, chair desk combo, and projected into the elevator. And then in front of it further was a tiny little wooden chair with like a heaping pile of oranges that were all like almost ready to fall over at any point. And by the end of the exhibit, you could come take an orange if you wanted and eat it or take it with you on your way. Now getting sculptural again, I'm almost done because I think my time is cruising, is I had a show at Hillier at the very beginning of 2024. This looked a lot about, it was looking at nature again and how we've become really removed from knowing a lot about what products we use every day and how that might have a link to nature from before. And I focused on marshmallows. And many people don't know that marshmallow is actually a medicinal plant that has been used since early Egyptian times. It's where the French got the idea to make actually marshmallow, the confection that we know, that we see as the legs on this table right now. Marshmallow root from the plant is very medicinal in how it's very, very moisturizing. Dry skin, feeling inner heat or anything, you drink marshmallow root cool tea and you're automatically refreshed. So I begin to build this world of like, well, let's use these tools of what it is now to play with what it has become before. And I use this vintage dollhouse that I wallpapered with photos of the actual marshmallow plant flower blossom. And then the house is suspended on legs of big poofy marshmallows. And this was a Victorian chair that I wove with I made a marshmallow seat for, as I took out the reed seat that was there previously, cane. And so we come to now. As was mentioned, I just had a kiddo, and being pregnant was a really wild experience for me. this idea of having this temporary body is just crazy. And I was enormously pregnant. I gained over 60 pounds. It was so mind-boggling to me that this was my body. And I was incredibly uncomfortable. It was summer. And I began to just throw myself in front of the camera, one, to like keep myself happy. I have to be making things, keep my mind moving. And then it became this like, oh, this could be some kind of project. And I'm not sure what kind of project this is going to be. I have a ton of photos that I've only started to really play with. But here I am, super pregnant, like playing with this like new body. It's like the perfect example of liminal space. I'm only temporary pregnant because then the baby comes, then this whole new world opens up. Another photo. This was the dog that you just heard barking, my sweet Eric, and me. I think this was about a week before the little lady arrived. Indigo made her way into the world. And I'm not sure where this body of work is going. This might just be, the continuation of me documenting my physical existence as I move through this world. I don't know where this project might go, if anywhere. But this is the first time I've ever shared any images outside of my house with anyone, so that feels kind of exciting. And that's my art practice. Thank you so much for being here and for listening, and totally happy to answer any questions that might arise.
Oh, this is wonderful. I think I'm always kind of excited when I see interdisciplinary artists and kind of the shifting from one medium to the next. And our last ACO of 24 was Joy Sipper. So another interdisciplinary artist kind of hopping from, metal to weaving to, from things to things. And I'm always kind of, and actually our next artist is Ellen Wise, who's also an interdisciplinary artist too. But I have this like question about like how do you adapt the idea to the medium, or is it the other way around? You choose like you come up with like a concept that you want to make art about, and then you go through your Rolodex of all the things you know how to do, painting and photography and so forth, and you say this medium belongs with this idea, or how does that process kind of play out in your head?
It's definitely intuitive. I think being interested in so many things I always think I have a palette of it already there. It's kind of the same decision if I was to take my brush and dip it into pink as opposed to yellow. I don't really know why, but I just kind of choose what feels right for it. And usually it's what makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And as Julia mentioned when she talks, do I feel like I'm about to throw up before I show this piece? Is it pushing me to my edge? Because if it's not, then it's too safe. Like, I really like that tension of like, oh man, is this going to fail big time, or could this be cool? So I think like learning, the piece that I had at Hillier where I sewed together like the actual marshmallows, I was like, this could just be a hot mess. Like mice could just come eat the whole thing while it's like in the gallery. I don't know. It could just be awful. But I think it's exciting. I like that exciting edge.
You have ideas where you kind of don't have the medium, or you have an idea of a medium but you don't know how to do it, so you have to kind of or go back and relearn a new medium just to kind of fulfill the idea, or we were like working with marshmallow, like this sounds like you learn at the Corcoran, I imagine.
No, what you learn at the Corcoran is you can do anything. And then how you actually get there is a lot of failing. I mean, so I found out I was pregnant and it was like the same week, I think. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do the show at Hillier. And I was sitting on the floor, like feeling so exhausted and like dysfunctional, and just being like, all right, let's just sew marshmallows. And it goes back to kind of what I was doing with the snake embroidery. It's this meditative, like, I am present, I am alive. I'm just going to see how many marshmallows I can sew. And you can ask my partner, Devin, he's on the phone now. It took a lot of messing up. And I was just like, I don't know if I can do this, but you really can do anything. You know, there's that famous Walt Disney quote that I've always loved. It's like, if you dream it, you can do it. And for some reason, I just kept seeing this chair having a marshmallow cushion. So I was like, I'm just going to make a marshmallow cushion. So yeah, I think failure is a big part of it. You know, you see all the nice stuff when you do these artist talks, but there's a lot of crap behind the scenes. There's a lot of really bad paintings. There's a lot of like, I always call it like the hatchet moment where you want to just like hack it up. And it's either like you do that or it gets good. So
You go through all the art books and you see all these perfect paintings, but you never see any of the failures and any of the artists.
or any of the anger and the frustration and the self-doubt. I mean, talk about self-doubt. Like you're like, what, why would I spend 100 hours sewing marshmallows? Right? Like you begin to really question like why you do some of these things, but there's this compulsion. It's like, and then you get it and you're like, that's why it was meant to be for this piece.
Yeah, it's a hard life being an artist. I had a friend, this is a tangent, but I had a friend in grad school who the second his thesis was over, he literally he took all the artwork from the critique area and threw it in the dumpster. And that was the end of the critique. And we were all just kind of like, that was your entire 2 years at IU, and it was like shocking to us. But that was just like he just couldn't stand being around it anymore, and he hated every piece of it, and that was it.
Well, that's actually a great example. So the ladder structure that I showed at the Georgetown piece, one of the final performance that I have mapped out for it is it's all going to burn down. And it's the piece is going to get sung backwards and the whole structure is going to burn simultaneously. And everyone's like, you can't burn those ladders. They're beautiful. I'm like, I hate those ladders. Let me tell you, I've moved those ladders on 2 different studio moves. It's awful. So I'm ready for them to go.
Yeah. Did you learn carpentry? This is awesome, Dawn. Thank you so much. I have like so many questions floating in my mind, and I don't know whether I can articulate any of them, but tell me how you built the ladders. Are you into carpentry, or did you make yourself learn for that project?
I learned for that project. And I worked with a family member who, it was actually this really cool experience, who lives in Tennessee that I didn't know too well. So it was an opportunity to go down there and get to know this family member and build all these ladders together. And I made several trips, and then I would tie them to my roof rack in my car and drive them back to DC. Yeah, I always like to learn new things. So if I can learn like carpentry to pull off a project, I think, yeah, it's important to me.
What a way to grow. That's
Mhm.
fantastic. And I love the paintings too. I think they're so evocative. I could just stare at them for a long time, and especially seeing them in person, which I haven't, but I would love to see them. Where are they? Are they in your house
Um,
now or somewhere?
I'm working on a really big one in my living room right now, but I have a studio right near Otis Street Arts. You know, Mount Rainier, how there's that little compound. Yeah, so I have a space in there, and that's where everything is. You're welcome to come by anytime. Just let me know and
Ooh,
I'll be there.
thank you. That would
I've
be
just started
lovely.
getting back to the studio post kiddo.
And what is the paint material that you're using?
All acrylic, and then I use some gouache, and I use a lot of gold and silver leaf too, actually. I like to play with those metals.
Yeah. Do you draw it first, or are you layering as you come along, as you think
Yeah,
of
it's
it?
all layers and layers and layers and layers. Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we have to go visit you.
Please, yeah, anytime.
Thank you. Other questions?
So what you're saying in your painting process and drawing process is it's intuitive and it evolves as you work on it. Like there's not a master plan when you start it necessarily. Is that right?
No, no master plan. Sometimes, so there's a new piece I'm about to start in the studio, and I have an idea for it, but it's like as soon as I get an idea, it usually changes anyway. So I just like to see how it unfolds.
And also, didn't the DC Commission buy one of your paintings?
Yeah, the silence in the spring.
Okay, so that's another place people can go see your work. Because on the DC Commission website, they say where the art bank collection is residing. So you can figure out, which government building it's in.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I never thought about that. I would love to know which government building that's in.
Yeah.
Got some weird stuff going on it.
You mentioned like the idea of like the choose your own adventure, and I saw that through the idea of like the chutes and ladders things. Does that, mm, besides kind of how it's worked into like your painting process and so forth, does it encroach in things like your photography or more installation stuff as well?
Oh, for sure. Because they're all bits and pieces that can be combined to direct you to the next thing. I'm not sure if that makes sense. There's a lot of space always for play. And so in choosing your own adventure, that's not to say that you're not serious. I mean, you can have the most dire situation ever, but there's always space to make a decision. And I think that is something I really try to articulate in my work, especially the paintings. Photo can be a little tough because it's so direct, especially if it's documentary photography. We often get very invested in the actual content of the photo as like a literal piece, and don't look at the emotional aspects maybe in the same way. But yes, I think no matter what we do, we're always choosing our own adventure. And we fail to recognize that there's so many courses in order to do that. And often that's just a perspective change. Does that answer your question, Jordan? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I was trying to come up with a follow-up question. But then, of course, I have other questions that interfere with my follow-up questions. So I'll just move on to what the other one is. Do you have a hierarchy of importance? Like with unfortunate for most artists, like the hierarchy of oil painting and then sculpture and so forth. And the poor watercolorists are always get mad at the oil painters and so forth. Is there a hierarchy in your head about what is your, the art that you want to be known for when all said and done, or do you have or is it kind of all your children are equal and you don't have to kind of pick favorites?
That's a really great question. Like if I was to keel over, what are people going to remember Dawn for? And it's so funny you say that because I get Google alerts, right? I'm sure we all, like artists, we have when we get our name. Today I got an obit for Dawn Marie Whitmore, which is my name. And I was like, this is so fascinating. Yeah. It was right before I signed on to this, and I was like, wow, she even have my same middle name. And it makes me think, like, I don't know, what would I be known for? Probably my face, like just in all of my work, my double stuff. But I would have to say, and this is like a very vulnerable answer, but painting I find to be the most challenging and also fantastic thing. I think it's like painting to me is the most vulnerable of my whole art practice. I don't think I would want to be known only as a painter, but that is something right now that I feel like I really want to play with and go deep on and try to understand.
Is it vulnerable while you're making the painting, or vulnerable exposing the painting to, or not exposing, that's not the right word, revealing the painting to other people? Which is
Both.
the both?
Both. Yeah. I mean, I think there's something about feeling the need to express something and like putting the brush on the canvas and being like, I am making this mark. It's very different. To me, it's much more serious than when, I'm dancing around in front of the camera or sewing or making sounds with my voice. I don't know why it just has this very intimate quality to me.
Interesting. I don't have that.
Someone is asking, how do you balance your artistic practice work and now baby?
The choose your own adventure. I'm not totally sure. Actually I do. First, Indigo is awesome. Thank you for that question, Christina. Our daughter Indigo is a really cool little human, and she's already come to the studio with me once. Was so cool. I popped her, she just kind of hung out in her stroller, and I was just sewing a massive 86-inch canvas, and she just watched. And so I'll set up her little like bouncy chair in front of my canvas here when I'm working, and she'll watch until she falls asleep. And one thing I've learned is the same as like also like how do you balance a full-time job and art practice? It's kind of the same. Now it's nice I'm on maternity leave, so I'm not working. So everything that I would be doing at work, I kind of do for baby. And then those slivers of time, it's like, I have 20 minutes, I'm going to draw. Or I have like 45 minutes, oh, paint now. And their urgency, I think, really helps keep the work moving. And I think hopefully when I catch up on my sleep and I'm sleeping a little better, I'll be able to either get up really early and paint or stay up to like have longer sessions. So, you know, it's really day by day. But it's an obsession. I have to do it. And if I don't do it, I get really unhappy. I just have to be making. It keeps the energy moving. You're welcome.
You can always collaborate with the kiddo.
Yes, well, I can't wait for that. I can't wait for
fun.
that. Yeah.
I remember when my son was, you know, very small. He's almost 13 now, but like he would scribble, and then I was like, how do I adapt that scribble into something of like, like kind of like tinkering with his drawing, collaborating, and then he would look at me and destroy my work with his scribbling.
Totally. I want to do something with sound. So I've
Oh,
been
wow.
singing to Indy since like early in my belly, and now she's getting very vocal, and I think it's like sing talking. And so I can't wait till we can do like, you know, like maybe some call and response or just something really cool.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Any final questions for our artist today
Do
before
you
she gets
still
back
have
to that?
do you still have a dark room, Dawn, and do you continue to do black and white photography?
I haven't shot film actually, I can't say that. I do still photograph with film, but I send it to a lab now. So no, I don't do it myself. But I still very much love the magic of photography. And whenever I talk to young photographers now, I always tell them to make sure you spend time in a dark room and don't just learn digital. Like that magic is everything. Having image come up from silver is just like, it's so
Love
cool.
the layering of your black and white photos with the fruit and the vines or the vegetation. I think that's really cool. That really struck something in me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This is wonderful.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun. I'm really, really grateful to have had this opportunity. This is my first kind of like artist talk since being a mom. And it feels really, you know, being a mom becomes such a central part of identity, like being like, oh, now I'm a mom and an artist. Like it just feels really good. So thank you all for having me here. Julia, thank you for a totally kick-ass intro. It was amazing. You're very, very kind. And I appreciate all the support for my work you shared.
Well, thank you again, Don and Julia. It has been a great start to our year. I want to remind everyone, in 2 weeks, we have Ellen Wise, who, if you were here for the Sandra Arkins video, she was one of the artists that collaborated with Sandra for the Cats and Art Center exhibition that was fall of last year, The Human Flood. So a lot of the work will be about kind of the human displacement based on global warming. Installation artist, multimedia artist. She's really quite fantastic. Also coming up, we have Matt Close, who is an incredible painter, and Matt is being presented by Erin Radicke, who one of our favorite painters from last year. She will be hosting that, which we're super excited about. And last but not least, coming up late February, February 22nd, I will have kind of similar to what we did last year with the plein air forum. We're going to have the Figure Painters Art Forum. I think that's what it's called. Presented by Montgomery Art Association, where Nicole M. Santiago is coming back along with Susan O'Neill and Brian Kadekis, I think his last name. I don't know how to say his last name quite yet. But three incredible figure painters kind of talking about as a dialogue, the kind of act of working with a model and the idea of the muse and things like that. So we have a really, really great slate for early 25. So I'm really excited about it. And I hope you guys all join us for these meetings as well. And if you want to go back into our archive and see other Art Clinic Online presentations, specifically Julia Bloom, uh, go ahead
Yeah.
and head to the webpage and see them. They're fabulous. And we are really honored to work with such incredible artists in the DMV area. Right, Mariana?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you so much for such an enlightening talk, and that you opened up the art world for all of us.
All right. Thank you all so much. Christina, it's so awesome to know you're on this call. I work with Christina. It's really, really fun. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.